Hi there, I'm Linda and this is Huttons Valley Permaculture. It was about 2.5 years ago that I first introduced you to my peach tree guild. In today's video we're going to do a revisit to the guild and have a look at all the changes that have happened over those years. Back in August of 2021 I published a video in which I discussed the design I had for my peach tree guild, and I also did some planting. Now the peach trees, these larger ones, were already in place, as to the support species, which are just represented by little dots here. So what I did in that video is add in the other plants, and I also let you know of the functions, because in permaculture we like to have multiple functions for the different plants that we're putting into a guild. The guild stretches from this peach tree here, which you saw recently in a harvest video, right down to this peach tree, which had more of a rotting fruit issue, also seen in that video. And the third peach tree, again we saw in that video, looking fairly sad at that time, is looking heaps better, and that's located on the far side of the swale. So today I thought we would go through the plan and have a look at each of the plants and see how they're going and see if they're doing what we had hoped that they would be doing. Starting with this peach tree here. The first tree we've got here is my Golden Queen peach, and it's the peach tree that gave the most beautiful fruit, and it's been my most productive to date. Now it is getting quite large. On the plan here I did allow a 4-metre diameter for it, so it's kind of getting up to that size. I will have to trim some more of these support species around it just to give it a little bit more space and a bit more air. So we can see that's it there, and there's a couple of support species which I've kind of designated with those two. So that's the Tagasasti that I've just marked as a bit of a dot on the plan. That eventually will be totally removed. We're still harvesting it for mulch at this point, but we can certainly open up this canopy a bit more. The growth this year really took me by surprise, and I didn't quite keep up with it. So this peach tree would have been much better with a bit more airflow around it. So getting that tree down and onto the ground will really help the peach tree in future. Additions I've made since that first video is just some Jerusalem artichokes, tubers that I threw in the ground. They produce a really lovely flower, and I didn't think that would impact this tree too much. It is kind of on the outer boundary of it, so I'll just sort of see how it goes in terms of airflow. These plants weren't that big when we needed the extra airflow, so I think that can stay there. In terms of size, I think I'm happy with the size this peach tree has got to. It certainly produces a lot of fruit, and I'm not willing to redo the cage that I put the netting over each year. So I think I'll be maintaining it sort of at this size with each pruning. Now that I've got an idea of the final size of my peach tree, I can better manage all the plants around it. Now I've got the Tagasasti in there that will be completely removed. This Hakea was planted sort of later on just as a gap filler. I think in the original plan I did have an elderberry in here, but I've kind of filled it with other plants. So this Hakea, it will get to be a large tree. So like the Tagasasti, I'll be probably taking it out completely at some stage, but in the meantime I can certainly harvest it for mulch. Now checking out the plan again, also next to this first peach tree, these little circles represent comfrey. Now I did throw some comfrey roots in the ground along here, so let's take a look at those. So we can see some signs of the comfrey, although at this point it is still struggling to get going with the grasses around. A few little plants have been able to poke their heads up and above the challenge of the grass, and this one's actually even flowered and spreading seeds around, which I don't mind at this point. It does edge my swale, and I can graze the animals along here, and they're fine to come in and sort of keep grazing down whatever's sort of poking out at the edge. Not all the comfrey has survived. There's another one hiding in there that's got going. This one has also flowered and seeded, and I think it might be doing a little bit better than the other plants because there doesn't seem to be as much of the grass overgrowing in this area. It's probably received more leaf litter and shading from these two trees that are right next to it. So the comfrey on this side of the berm is slowly getting going. This tree here actually doesn't appear on the plan at all, and I never planted it. This is one of the volunteers. In this area, black wattles volunteer very readily, and it's right next to one of the tagasastis that I did plant. At some point, I will be taking this tree down. They get massive, so I don't really want that size blocking the light from all my other trees that I've planted. So that will be coming down at some point, as will this tagasasti here, but for the moment we're just harvesting both for mulch. So that brings us to the second peach tree on this side, and this is a species that I got sort of as a bonus from the nursery, and it didn't have a label on it. So I whacked it in anyway, and it's the one that struggled with brown rot this season. So definitely we'll have to open up the canopy. These support trees are getting really large, and so we need to bring them down. And I also planted some Jerusalem artichoke around this tree, although it might have been a bit too close. I didn't think about the netting that would have to go over it, so we had to tuck that in. And also it probably creates a bit more of a restriction of airflow, so I might have to just keep chopping those down until after harvest and then let them shoot. And I also have another hakea here. Again, I didn't really think of the future when I put this one in, which was later than my original guild sort of plant out. So that one will have to come out as well. But nothing is wasted. It all creates lots of biomass. Even if I have to keep chopping this artichoke plant every year, that's all fertility for the whole system that gets put down onto the ground. And the hakea, that just started off as a little self-seeded plant around the place. So again, we've just made the most of that and created a bit more biomass to spread around to benefit all the rest of the plants. Also, just next to my peach tree here are two gooseberry plants which actually don't appear in this position on the map. I did make a change to the map after thinking through the positioning and the sun requirements for these plants. So I moved them from somewhere where they would have got too much shade. Right here, I found that these plants were the only ones to actually fruit this year because they got that sunshine. I'll be showing you some other gooseberries a bit later on that kind of lack that sun, and they haven't fruited as yet. Now, like the Jerusalem artichoke and the hakea, I hadn't really thought through the positioning of the gooseberries in relation to netting over the peach tree. So if you're designing a peach tree guild or something along these lines, always make sure you plan for the future needs and allow for things like this. Right here is the edge of the peach tree guild, and I did plant a wormwood and also some oregano in this area. Now, I think the oregano, being sort of more a small ground cover until it sort of starts to flower, was just a bit ambitious to plant in this area that still has lots of grasses to be controlled. The oregano was planted just here somewhere, but there's nothing to be found of it, whereas the wormwood is still kicking on nicely. Wormwood kind of goes to flower, and I usually trim that down and use that as mulch, but the plant is shooting again nicely. This is the peach tree we're currently looking at. Just here I've got some Vietnamese mint, but the buttercup has certainly taken over that, and Vietnamese mint struggles in winter here, so it would have been inundated by grasses and these other plants during that time and not kind of made its way back again. So now we're working our way to the other side of the berm. These plants represent gooseberries that I actually moved to here, and that's the ones we saw just before. These are actually a couple of rosemary that are doing quite well. Just crossing onto the other side of the berm are those two rosemaries. This one is the larger of the two, and there's another one just sort of hiding behind it, and they've taken off beautifully, and there's heaps of rosemary that could be harvested from these plants. Just below the rosemary plant, you can see the comfrey in this area, which I also lined the swale berm with. It's certainly getting going a lot better than on the other side. This plant here is one of the support species that I planted at the original time when I planted the peach tree, and it has been used for mulch on a number of occasions, so I've been able to sort of maintain the size not too big. This little plant here that's hiding in these grasses that need managing is a Wistringia, which I planted later, and that really is for the pollinators. It's a native flowering plant. It flowers in winter, so it's a good source of food for the bees when other things aren't flowering. Even though I have kind of maintained the wattle's size, it does need a lot of pruning still. It's right next to my Red Haven peach tree, which, if you recall from the peach tree harvest video and the brown rot, this was really challenged. It had a lot of sap coming out of it and it looked atrocious. The year before it was affected with curly leaves, and I thought that was going to take over, but it's actually bounced back. The leaves look great and most of the sap has disappeared, and the tree itself is looking really lovely. Just standing in the middle of the berm now, on the other side of that Red Haven peach tree, I thought I'd show you the gooseberries. Now on the map, the gooseberries, there's 3 marked here, although I did change the position. I did put 2 there, and then I put another 2 here. And that's what we can see just going through here. So these plants are growing really well. They might just need a bit of weeding. That's actually a lemon balm that I added in later on. But hopefully they'll fruit soon. If I can manage the surrounding trees and get them a little bit more sunshine, we should have success with fruiting. Actually, there are 3 gooseberries here. There's 1, 2, 3, and those plants are all growing really well. But I think with this Tagasasti here, that you can see on the map, just in that position here between the 2 peach trees, is creating quite a lot of shade in this area, so much so that it has prevented flowering and fruiting of these gooseberries, even though that they are growing really well. So by taking down a lot of this canopy, not only will help our peach tree, but hopefully we'll get some gooseberries in future. Now back to our plan, let's have a look at this wattle tree here that's just represented by a dot. But in real life, that dot looks like this. It's actually a really lovely tree, this one, and I kind of don't really want to take it down. I have pruned quite a lot of its lower branches and used those as mulch, but I haven't sort of taken any of the top canopy at the moment because I have used that as protection for some really frost-sensitive plants. Now these ones are pepinos and they were both gifted to me. This one's been in the ground a bit longer and it's a bit bigger, and I'm starting a second plant over there. As the pepinos get larger, I'll then take out sort of more of the canopy bit by bit and see how they go in winter with frosts. So while the plan was for this tree to mostly disappear, I think because it's supporting those other 2 little plants, a lot of this canopy might remain over time. I'll kind of just slowly chip away at it. I will reduce a bit more of the canopy that's sort of heading towards the peach tree, just to ensure that that's got lots of airflow around it. But this tree I've decided I really love, and I wouldn't mind just leaving it here. So that is our guild of 3 peach trees. The only other thing that I didn't discuss was these little circles here, and they were just individual chamomile plants. I did have chamomile in to start with, but with all the grasses, They didn't sort of volunteer seeds everywhere. They just couldn't get going with the grasses. So they kind of died out. And I figured, what's the point trying to keep them going if the grasses are still a challenge? But if you have a look around here, you can see that the grasses really aren't as much of an issue as they were back then. What I am finding is there's lots of buttercup that gets going on these berms. During winter we have a lot of rain here, and the soil is really moist for a lot of the year, and that's when buttercup loves to grow. So that's kind of taken over a lot of the spaces. I do have big tufts of grass like this, but I'll get my little sickle onto that and they'll come down really quickly. And I find that that isn't an issue. That will be under control fairly soon. We have had a bit of a dry spell lately, and I find when the buttercup dries out, it just sort of dies off and creates a bit of mulch on top of the soil surface, which is a really good self-pruning mechanism really, and helps build the soil without any effort from me. 2.5 years on, and the Peach Tree Guild with all its growth is such a beautiful place. I love it, and I'm also finding wildlife loves it, and that's actually creating a bit of a drama. Just recently I was thinking of doing some chop and drop in this area when I came across these little owls. I think they're southern boorbooks, and I think it was a little family. Two of the little owls were roosting in this area all day, every day for a few weeks, and I thought they'd moved in permanently. But they've gone on their way again now, which means I can get in here to do the chop and drop. But it just brings me lots of joy. You know, you're growing lots of food, but you're also growing lots of habitat for all these really beautiful birds. On the list of things to do in the coming weeks is lots of chop and drop, as you can see. But I won't be doing any planting in the near future. I do find with the chop and drop, you do need lots of space to get in there and get the tree down, and then lots of space to put it down on the ground. In the beginning years in the food forest, you do find lots of materials that look like this. I just keep layering it down and that kind of slowly breaks down. I'm hoping that in another 5 years, when I've kind of reduced the need to put all this mulch down, then I might be able to plant out some ground covers in areas like under this peach tree. Comparing then to now has been really interesting for me, and I hope you found it fascinating too. Don't be daunted if you've got a pile of grass to plant into. Just start, because who knows, 2.5 years later, yours might be looking like this also. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.